I think that a lesser discussed aspect of minimalism is the sort of aesthetic aspiration compared to the reality of living life as a minimalist. I think a lot of influencers and people who are living this sort of lifestyle where they're focused on, really getting to the heart of what matters, they tend to overlook something that I think is pretty important. And that's creativity and character and infusing your eccentricities and weirdness into your environment as a form of self-expression. I guess you could say I'm a recovering extreme minimalist. I used to have a spreadsheet where I tracked every single belonging that I had, and it was my goal for a really long time to try to get that number down to like 50 items. In the process of tracking all of the things that I had, I also convinced my partner to do the same because we're both really into simple living, intentional living. And something that began to happen as a consequence was, because we're both kind of competitive, we would dispute who would end up having fewer items on their spreadsheet. And I think around this time, I started to realize some of the problems with minimalism that just aren't often discussed online. The attraction that I've had to minimalism stems from this desire to have more control in my day-to-day life. I want to reduce the friction in my surroundings, and I also just value the aesthetics of a decluttered, clear, open space. So I was really drawn to this lifestyle of, again, just really stripping away the things that aren't necessary to me so that I can focus more on who I want to be and the projects I'm working on and just like the aspirations that I have for my life. But this whole spreadsheet thing sort of revealed to me that minimalism was making me neurotic. The more competitive my partner and I were being about having fewer items than one another, I started to realize that this was impacting my mental health, as embarrassing as it is to say. As a minimalist, the whole intention is that you're not fixated on your stuff. You are able to focus on the important things in your life and not the materialities of your day-to-day or whatever. And instead, I was becoming so obsessed with using up consumable goods so that I could cross something off of the spreadsheet. I was just eliminating things for the sake of attaining this goal of like a certain number on a spreadsheet. I guess I thought that by maintaining this spreadsheet, I would be a better minimalist, or I would attain some sort of self-awareness and transcend beyond the confines of my material human existence. But that didn't happen. Our culture, at least like American consumerist society, really influences us to feel like if only I had that nice car, I would be fulfilled and I would feel content. And so minimalism sort of challenges this in one sense, right? By telling us that our material belongings are not indicative of our value as human beings. But there's sort of an irony here because, at least for me, the opposite started to happen, where I felt like if I didn't own this object and I could find a way to live my day-to-day without all of these books on my shelf, somehow I'll be happier and more content because I'll have fewer items. And it became this utter fixation on this sort of ideal that's just unattainable. I wanted to disown everything, but as a consequence, my life felt much less fulfilling in a lot of ways. Some people might feel like if I have X item, then my life will be more fulfilling. And for me, at a certain point, I felt like if I can live without X item, my life will be more fulfilling. And while these are two opposites, materialism versus minimalism, they really kind of result in a similar dilemma of discontent. I would still say that I'm a minimalist, and I still carry the ideals of minimalism at my core. I am distraught when I'm in environments that are cluttered or, visually busy and overwhelming. And I am a designer by trade, so aesthetics are really important to me. But at the same time, this has turned into obsession and this sort of amplified perfectionism that has begun to work against me. I do think that it's important to reflect on some of the ways that these lifestyles or like influencers online talking about minimalism, I think it's important to check in with those things and compare them to the reality of being a human being on Earth. We're sold this image that you need to live between white walls with no art and the shelves need to be bare. You can't express character through minimalism, right? Because it's antithetical to this idea of rejecting stuff or being ascetic. I don't know, I want to challenge that notion that you can't be a minimalist and also be eccentric. I mean, and it's not like anyone is overtly saying that that's the case, but I do find that if you look up minimalism, it's like someone wearing like a black turtleneck and the same pair of pants every day, and that's fine, like that's cool. But like for me, I like to live my day to day leaning into curiosity and like a little bit of chaos, and I think it's important that we challenge the notion, like I said, that like you can't express your character and that you can't convey a sense of creativity through the way you show up in the world just because you also value minimalism. I don't know, I'm rambling. You're allowed to like things, you're allowed to appreciate things, but it feels like in some sense, this sort of extreme version of minimalism imposes a type of shame on us for liking things. This was sort of exemplified for me back at that time when I was obsessively working on this spreadsheet and trying to dwindle the number down further and further. A big part of that was directly connected to my rejection of consumerism, because I feel like we are harming the environment through the consumption of so much plastic, so much unnecessary shit, and I felt like minimalism was a way for me to remove myself from that sort of cyclical consumerist pattern of life. But along with that, I forced myself to believe that liking things wasn't sophisticated, or that liking things was immature or somehow childish or irresponsible even because of the impacts environmentally and otherwise. I felt like, oh, well, if I'm buying stuff, I'm directly feeding into this sort of capitalist hellscape that I feel encaged by, that I want to free myself from. So I think it's important to challenge some of this, because we put ourselves in this box where now we feel like everything I purchase, everything I do, every single action I take has to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, I am somehow failing. I don't know. Does this make sense? It's okay to like things. Do you guys know about Smiskis? Am I so late to this? I know this is so silly, but the whole idea for this video was spawned because of Smiskis. I have not given myself permission to like things because I feel like it's somehow a failing of character, or like I'm not the perfect stoic minimalist whatever. But I discovered Smiskis and I just fell in love with the idea of these silly, simple little green guys. I like this, and I am not ashamed to tell you that I like this. He's so cute. But in all seriousness, there's a couple of reasons why I actually think it's really crucial that we like things and that we allow ourselves to have some things in our environment that bring us joy. So one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is my connection to music. And as somebody who releases music, produces music, I know that artists are currently being paid absolute garbage by these enshittified platforms like Spotify and Apple Music and so forth. There's a trend right now of people really leaning into more analog activities, and I've talked about it in my previous video on analog dopamine. Like, I've been thinking a lot about getting a record player. I've been reconnecting to some of the music that I really loved when I was a little bit younger. The Mars Volta just released a new album, and it's just like sparked this whole thing where I just really want to reconnect with this music that I used to just so deeply fuck with when I was younger. And I was thinking like, oh, it'd be really cool to get a record player. In the pursuit of minimalism, someone might trade in all of their vinyl because there's a digital alternative in something like Spotify. And by having fewer objects in their home, they might think that they're doing something that demonstrates their perseverance as a minimalist. Or me, for example, I've gotten rid of so many books because I just tell myself, oh, I don't need these books. You could go to a bookstore and buy a book right now, and it would help the author way more than if you buy their book on Amazon and you listen to it and you don't even get to own it. We've been convinced that there are all these digital alternatives, so like we don't need stuff anymore. And I think that there is a difference between stuff and clutter. Like, you can acquire things that bring you joy and that make you feel happy and that feel like external sort of representations of your soul, right? And like, there's no shame in that. There shouldn't be shame in that. You can have a collection of 50 records, and if you love all of them and you support those artists, to me, that's like way cooler than just using Spotify and ripping artists off like myself who end up getting like $1 from DistroKid every year. I'm rambling. Hopefully this is coherent, but the next piece of this whole conversation that I wanted to bring up was mental health. This is me just speaking to my own experience. I am diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. I've struggled with it for a long time. So this might just be part of my personal experience and might not feel relevant to you, but I think it's important for me to talk about, and I'm sure like someone out there can relate. Minimalism gave me a false sense of control over some of my compulsive and intrusive thoughts. I felt like if I could control the environment, I could find a sense of peace and a sense of ease and like push away some of the scary feelings that I have or scary thoughts that I might have. And a lot of this is connected directly to like my fear of death, which is like a chronic intrusive thought that I have, where I guess I in some way feel like if I don't have a lot of stuff, then I'm not so bound to the earth, and then like maybe somehow death is less scary. And so I've been really trying to welcome things into my environment that to me aren't clutter and add value and add laughter or joy or fun to my life. Maintaining minimalism to such an extreme extent sort of felt like I was constantly trying to ensure that there was zero dust in my room, if that makes sense. It was like things to me that were seen as frivolous or unnecessary or excessive felt like the equivalent of like dust. Like it just felt like this accumulation that I couldn't control. And so I always had to be on the lookout for the dust, right? Like what in my environment is something that I can let go of or something that's unnecessary. And at a certain point, that becomes really exhausting. That no longer is aligned with the lifestyle where you're trying to reduce friction. That's actually creating a lot of friction. For me, by honing in on this extreme approach, I was creating a problem. If you want to embody more minimalist sort of lifestyle choices, and you also know that it's easy for you to get fixated on things, then like you need to bear that in mind, that like maybe you don't need to make a fucking spreadsheet with everything you own. For me, it was really satisfying to do that, I'm not gonna lie, but in reality, it was actually detracting from my ability to focus on what's most important. Why wouldn't I just redirect that time and energy to making music or creating art or spending time doing something that I love instead of writing out a spreadsheet of every t-shirt I own? Who does that? That's so weird. So anyways, probably gonna cut most of this shit that I'm saying out because I'm not really saying a whole lot. My point is just that minimalism is not a one-size-fits-all lifestyle, and there seems to be this idea permeating the internet that if you want to be a minimalist, you have to live a bleak, white, walled life. And I just want to tell you that that's not true. So all of this is, I guess, my own way of processing my life and my approach to these things. But I've been just sort of, over the past few months, approaching minimalism differently. Buying Smiskis. You're allowed to have a space that feels like a sanctuary and not a fucking showroom. Sometimes I think it's important that we self-assess and we reflect and evaluate on our lifestyle choices. And for me, minimalism is absolutely at the heart of who I am. But that doesn't mean that it's not without flaws or challenges that I feel like are important to address. It's okay to care about something and be aligned with something and also acknowledge that maybe sometimes it's toxic. And I think that minimalism, at least online, and the portrayal of minimalism in some ways has become really toxic. If this resonates, I would love to hear a little bit about your journey with minimalism, where you're at with it. Thank you so much for watching this video. It means so much to me, especially as a new channel, to connect with people who are on similar journeys and have similar interests. So I really, really appreciate all of you who are here. Bye. 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 Bye.